Granite Classical Tutorials is a tutorial service spanning grades 1 through 12, designed to give structure and support to the classical home school. We offer families the structure and rigor of the classical method blended with the flexibility and autonomy of homeschooling. The result is a truly unique educational experience. At Granite, you, the homeschooling parent, are the primary educator, but you are not alone in your homeschooling endeavor. Our tutors come alongside you to provide you with the curriculum and methodologies you need to effectively homeschool in the classical tradition. Meeting twice per week for tutorial instruction, Granite classes bring excellence and structure to the classical homeschooling experience. The classical method is, in essence, an attempt to get back to the highly effective teaching methods and philosophies of the ancient and medieval educators who understood that the end goal of an education was to help the student learn to absorb information effectively, think deeply about that information, and then consciously and discerningly allow his or her worldview to be informed by this new knowledge and understanding. As education has evolved into the modern era, it has largely lost this focus on understanding and wisdom. As a result, modern-day students learn a wealth of information in many different fields, but they have lost the art of learning. One of the first proponents of classical education in the modern era was the British author Dorothy Sayers. In her seminal speech, The Lost Tools of Learning, she said this:
"Is not the great defect of our education today that, although we often succeed in teaching our pupils subjects, we fail lamentably on the whole in teaching them how to think? They learn everything except the art of learning."
The problem that Sayers identifies here is precisely what classical education seeks to rectify. The most important goal of classical education at Granite Classical is to teach students the art of learning. In every subject that we teach, we use the stages of the classical trivium to develop students into independent scholars who will thrive in whatever field they pursue after their schooling because they have learned how to learn. What the classical education does is extracts the tools of learning inherent in the medieval trivium, consisting of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and then applies them to the broader fields of study. When you learned the grammar of the English language, you were learning to identify the various parts of speech and the rules that govern correct use of words, clauses, and punctuation. What classical educators realized is that there is a kind of grammar, not just in English, but in all subjects, a foundational set of knowledge which must be learned before critical thinking in that field can truly take place. From this, we have derived the grammar stage in classical education. It is the preliminary learning period in which students absorb the foundational skills and information that will be useful to them in their future studies. In English, grammar stage students are, of course, learning English grammar, and they're also developing reading and writing skills and gaining a broad exposure to stories and poetry. For history and geography studies, in the first and second grade, we focus on geography so that students have a firm grasp of the world map and the people and cultures which inhabit it before they have to think more abstractly to understand a chronological timeline. Then, in third grade, they get exposure to the historical timeline and they learn about the different people and events which have shaped our world. It's worth noting that we study history chronologically starting in third grade and go through an entire timeline from third through sixth grade. Latin studies start with the exposure to Latin vocabulary and then move into the study of Latin grammar. In science, students get a broad exposure to facts and knowledge about the world, and they learn to classify that information according to scientific customs. In first and second grade, students also get exposure to the arts. They learn about different types of music and composers and different types of art. And in math, math is not part of our core curriculum shown here, but we do offer math supplements involving a lot of drilling and math facts so that students can learn to quickly do mental calculations and learn the basics of arithmetic and pre-algebra. So in all of this, students are learning the basic foundational grammar of whatever subject they're learning. The purpose of this stage is to allow students to soak up as much foundational information as possible and to allow them to develop basic skills as thoroughly as possible. We are teaching students how to effectively absorb the information they encounter. This is an extremely important skill for learning within a new field. You have to understand the basic parts, the vocabulary and grammar of a field, in order to work well within it. And as it happens, this first stage of learning pairs up perfectly with students in the elementary school years. Young children delight in memorization. They are extremely gratified when they can pull a correct answer from their arsenal of memorized facts. So we harness this in the grammar stage and teach young children to absorb as much as possible. But learning does not stop with simply absorbing. Next, you have to think about the information you've gained. This is what the study of logic helps you do. You learn to relate all the bits of information you've gathered, to analyze them and think critically about them, and to reach a valid conclusion through reasoning. But this process is valid across the subjects as well, and thus we get the logic stage. Starting in the logic stage, students combine their humanities studies so that they not only learn about the philosophers, politicians, and theologians of the past, but examine them on a chronological spectrum and see how the ideas and worldviews of one generation influence the next along the timeline. Students learn history from those who lived it by reading primary sources, and they study literature from the historical time periods they are studying in order to see how the themes and artistry of a piece of literature reflect the worldviews of a particular time and culture. They also begin to appreciate the complexity of artistry and understand how a beautifully crafted work communicates its purpose effectively. Students in this stage, of course, take up the study of logic as well, in order to develop inductive and deductive reasoning skills. Students also study speech and debate as part of this class, learning how to prepare effective arguments for both sides of an issue in a formal policy debate. Students also spend 2 years in this stage studying the Bible, learning how to cull truth from a biblical text with hermeneutics, and learning to think theologically. In math and science, students start using the known to discover the unknown. Math is, again, not part of our core curriculum shown here, but in their options math classes, students will be solving for x and working out geometrical proofs. They start thinking and using math much more abstractly. In their science classes, they're using the scientific method to form an educated hypothesis, conduct an experiment, and reach a conclusion. The focus in this stage is on teaching students not what to think, but how to best think about the information they encounter. This is the second invaluable tool of learning. And, like the grammar stage, the logic stage fits in nicely with a child's natural development. Around middle school, students start to really enjoy argumentation and reasoning. If you have students this age, you may have started to notice this propensity for argumentation in your students. Whereas before your child would have complained about a chore or simply begged for a certain privilege, now your child might actually present some pretty good reasons why he or she should be allowed to put off vacuuming the living room or to put off bedtime for an extra hour. Such students have reached the logic stage of their development. So classical education harnesses this acuity. The learning stage implements a lot of Socratic discussion and debate because these tools help students develop their critical thinking skills. The final stage of the trivium is the rhetoric stage, and it builds upon the previous 2 stages. Rhetoric, as a field of study, is the art of persuasion. It is the ability to winsomely and effectively argue one's position. Of course, in order to be able to do this, you have to have a firm grasp of what you believe. Beyond absorbing and analyzing information, rhetoric-level students must use that information and analysis to form and support their own opinions and beliefs. In their Omnibus classes, rhetoric students are discussing ethical, philosophical, political, and theological questions with their peers and tutors to better determine what they themselves believe about the world. When they study literature and the arts in these classes, they're taking their understanding of artistry further and even applying it winsomely and effectively to express themselves. In rhetoric, they're honing their oral, speaking, and debating skills so that they can present their ideas with winsome and effective persuasiveness. We also continue to offer math and science classes for rhetoric stage students, but these courses are not part of our core curriculum, so they're not listed here. These classes are intentionally left optional in this stage so that you can have more flexibility as a homeschooler in the later years. It is important to realize that we don't ask students to do this kind of worldview application until they are ready for it. By the later high school years, most students are becoming aware of how their own perspective is being influenced by the ideas they are encountering through their studies. It is only then that we ask them to respond and engage, because it is only after meticulously collecting facts and data and carefully analyzing them that one can form a true opinion. This is the final and most important stage of learning. Dorothy Sayers said that the sole and true end of education is simply this: to teach men how to learn for themselves. At Granite Classical Tutorials, we couldn't agree more. That is why we use the classical method. The student who has these tools of absorbing, thinking, and expressing is one who will thrive in any area of study, because that student has learned how to learn. If you are interested in visiting Granite or in enrolling in our tutorial service, please contact us. We are eager to come alongside you as you teach your students how to learn for themselves.